very low in Congress. It's very low for a reason. I think one of the reasons is because morality. People look at the congressional people as having no moral background, nothing,
well,
zero.
I think you're 100% accurate on that. I went and saw Justice Scalia. He spoke at my law school. We just had a 50th anniversary. And it was kind of profound. I love watching individuals speak. He said, very compartmentalized individual in his thoughts. And as he's marching through, he said he was brought here to speak on why have a Catholic organization, why have a Catholic university. And his response that he cut back to was that I think most people missed the message of World War II, that a country that was #1 in science, art, literature, anything else that you would think of that would make a country a wonderful place, produced Adolf Hitler. And that education, knowledge and understanding without a moral compass is a dangerous thing.
Germany certainly established the fact that they weren't too bright. They entered 2 world wars and lost them both. So, I mean, we can attribute that to a lack of education.
And so I guess to come back to it is that while I carry that in my own personal respects, and that I would demand that from those around me, it's not for me to impose, and that's the very fine line, for me to impose federally that upon anybody else in my understanding of the way the Constitution is set up.
Sure, and Michelle, you have a
Yeah,
question?
one of our major issues is our spending.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get to DC, what are the areas that you're going to be looking intensely at, and are there any departments that you would eliminate?
In order to get a hold of spending, you have 4 main areas that are going to take up combined approximately 80% of the annual federal budget. 3 of which are under your mandatory spending, and that is Medicare and Medicaid, which is health insurance, unemployment insurance, which is basically when you go on unemployment leave, that kind of thing. And the last one is your Social Security pension plans. The 4th area is discretionary spending, which is defense spending. Combined, those make up approximately 80% of the federal budget. When you talk about other departments, they make up less than 20% of the annual budget. The disparity in the current numbers is approximately $1.2 trillion budgeted annually, approximately, that we're going to have a deficit running. In order for us to tackle that deficit, which was one of the reasons why I was so concerned about the fiscal policy of our current incumbent in Congress, is that it will do nothing for the next 4 to 5 years, and we will start to increase that deficit about $4.5 trillion, I would anticipate, if we followed that policy. So what has to happen is we have to reform the 3 areas, big areas of mandatory spending, which are Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, and unemployment security. And if we can reform those, because the way you reform mandatory spending isn't like discretionary. You don't just slash. You have to change the makeup of the legislation so that the projection of the population is no longer on those programs. And so what has to happen is take something like unemployment insurance. If you're going to go on unemployment, I would want to see something instituted that you're required to put in 16 hours of volunteer work a week. Volunteer work, not community service. So that you pick the trade that you want to work in and you volunteer with any business or company or private individual in that trade. And so something like that has been shown to reduce the portion of the population drastically. So therefore there's less money that will be allocated for the program. You get into some more difficult areas when you start touching things like Social Security pension plans and Medicare and Medicaid, your health insurance, but I mean even those, for the most difficult, take the Social Security pension plans. There's no money. I do not think those will continue to function. Even under a projection like Paul Ryan's plan, where we're going to move the age at which you go on and the amount of which you have to put in, still, I don't think it's going to work. What I'm a proponent of is taking at 1 year, whatever date we institute it, anybody 39 and younger, you're out of the projection. It's done. You're out of the projection, and the only thing you do is pay the difference annually that 40 and older doesn't make up. So in essence, what you've created is a growing class and a shrinking class. And then so under that, the allocation for those individuals 39 and younger will be significantly less money that they have to pay, and then there's no longer the money that has to go into the federal budget to make up the difference for the individuals that are currently there. By the same token, you can institute other policies where people can opt out So you don't need the Social Security money. There's always the thought that, well, what do we do with those individuals at the end of their lives when they don't have any money? And you can create a hybrid off of that for any surplus out of that into privatization for those individuals. So that you move to, it's a kind of a crossbred between Paul Ryan's plan and what I would call the Chilean model. And so in essence, that's how I would deal with Social Security pension plans. As far as health insurance goes, and here the main goal, I'm sorry to give you such a long answer, but the main goal is to reduce all of these every year by a third. So that on the third year, if we just keep the budget that we have this year, we'll have a balanced budget. And so it's not that you have this quick hemorrhaging. That's because if you do just slash by a complete third immediately, I think you'll see hemorrhaging. But if we do it third departmentally, we can get there. And so with something like Medicare and Medicaid, I think that the stats need to be reviewed, as in what do you have to have as far as income levels and how we value those income levels that allow you to go on these plans. I mean, unfortunately, everybody's heard of the guy who won the lottery, I think, twice and can still receive Medicaid. He won the lottery twice. So, I mean, there are maladies in these programs that can be fixed. And it's not just going after fraud as well. I mean, I was in Miami and there was a lot of things that went on as far as Medicaid sales of wheelchairs that never existed. You know, so you have that type of fraud that's rampant. But even then, in going after the fraud, there's going to be an additional cost. So we actually have to reform the way the program's going to work.
There's a problem there.
Well, no, and that's it, and that's the next thing. You step up the enforcement, you make sure that it goes through, and then you have to change the format and stats on how people will go on these programs and to how long they're going to stay on. I mean, the goal here was that we help you in the event of a catastrophic failure, not that we carry you from cradle to grave. And unfortunately, that's kind of been the push in the last 35 years. And so in tackling just those four areas, defense spending also has to be looked at. You can't just say I'm going to balance the budget and truthfully say you're not going to look at defense spending. But by touching that, by no means, way, shape, or form would I ever permit something to cut the salaries, pension, or anything that goes to servicemen. People that are taking bullets for this country deserve anything that we give them, if not more. Getting into departments, yeah. I mean, everybody wants to run in and say, cut the Department of Education. That's how we'll balance the budget. $69 billion a year makes up for 10% of state education. I mean, literally, it's a drop of water in the bucket. And unfortunately, that's the type of program that, while it's only a drop of water in the bucket, I think has systemically destroyed education in this country. Because states themselves have to reform their entire teaching structure so that they can receive just this 10% of funding coming from the federal government. And so, in essence, yes, I agree with the policy that needs to be gone. It's not effective anymore. It doesn't work for the general welfare of the country, which is the only constitutional means for its existence. However, by way of balancing the budget, it does nothing. $69 billion is nothing.
Well, we have about 5 minutes left of the interview. Are there any other questions?
If you and Mr. Donalds are in the same room, who wins the debate?
Does Mr. Donalds have half of the individuals there supporting him? Because that's been the way of the last, I guess, 3 events that we've had. So
That's a question. My question to you, if you and Mr. Donalds were in the same room, who would win the debate?
I believe I win the debate.
Thank you.
And speaking of that, related to that, you have 2 legislators. You've got Mr. Donalds, who's affiliated himself with the Tea Party. He's a financial person. You've got a former media talk show host, and you've got also a Washington policy expert. How do you differentiate yourself from your competition?
Well, I'd say very simply is that my policy, my mindset's driven by nothing other than the Constitution. I'm not looking to groups or other individuals or other leaders of organizations. I'm looking to the knowledge, study, and research that I've put into making me who I am, and then sitting down and saying, based upon the Constitution, how do all these things work? So I don't go to some agenda that's put out by Neil Bortz or Linder and saying that this is the right tax that we have to have. I look back and I say, okay, I take your policy, let me take a look at it. And I parse it with the language in the Constitution, I parse it with what we currently have, and I come to my own decisions. I think when you get right down to it, you want to say, how are these people driven? they're not driven by the same knowledge and understanding that I have of the laws and the makeup of this country.
Related to that, have you signed or affirmed any pledges, such as the Norquist Pledge? And if so, why?
I'm trying to think. I think I signed the repeal of the death tax pledge, but I think the entire tax structure needs to be reformed. I'm more of a proponent of Steve Forbes' projection on the flat tax. It's very simple, it's very easy, there's not such a heavy reporting requirement. And let me tell you, for most businesses, or even myself, where we're at like maybe 33 to 35%, 17% is a welcomed understanding. And so.
But you've not affirmed the tax pledge, correct? The no new taxes.
I don't know.
Or the systematic. Okay.
I am against raising taxes. I don't think that we need to raise taxes. I think we need to reform spending.
Okay. Well, any final comments before we conclude?
No, simply, I mean, you guys are left with a very difficult decision. And I think you have a lot of qualified individuals before you. But ultimately, in making that decision, and coming back to your question in the very beginning, is who is going to stick true to what they said? You know, even Jim Roach, take him. I'd like to listen to Jim at some of these debates, a Democratic candidate. Unfortunately, when he gets there, Obama's going to put him in a headlock. He's going to do whatever Obama says. And that's what's going to happen. And so the question is, look back to everybody's knowledge, experience level, and what they've done in their lives. And there hasn't been a point in my life, ever, that somebody's going to put me in a headlock. It won't happen. And it's because my base comes from a knowledge and understanding of the law.
Thank you very much.
Okay.